Hey everybody, Jeff Davis here, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Chelsey Brooke Cole. Chelsey is a psychotherapist and a best-selling author specializing in narcissistic abuse and complex trauma. She has written and published the very powerful book, which is called If Only I'd Known: How to Outsmart Narcissists, Set Guilt-Free Boundaries, and Create Unshakable Self-Worth. And as a writer, a speaker, and a mental health advocate myself, I'm really excited to talk to her today. Chelsey, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Yeah. Yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
My first question in mind, and I've been able to listen to some of your powerful content, is I've noticed you have a really powerful story, and you've dealt with narcissistic abuse yourself. So I was curious if you could walk us through what you experienced growing up.
Sure. And it's one, I feel like when people ask me that question, I'm like, I've really been preparing to specialize in narcissistic abuse my whole life. I just didn't have the term for it, as many people don't. Like, we're dealing with narcissists, but we just don't know what to call it. So, sure, I'll give kind of an overview. So I've always been really interested in understanding why people do what they do. Like, from a very young age, I was one of those kids who was reading self-help books, reading personal development books. And I think partly that came from my personality on the Myers-Briggs. I'm an INFJ, and I'm just really interested in understanding the meaning behind things, the purpose, motivations, just always been interested in understanding why people do what they do. So I think partly that was just my interest, but also I think I was trying to make sense of what was going on in my household and not knowing, not knowing what to call it, like not knowing that I was dealing with a narcissistic parent. So on the one hand, I had a very loving, empathetic, compassionate mom who was involved and helped me with so much. And we would have conversations like to understand why people do what they do, always for the purpose of creating more connection and having more meaningful relationships. And so I had that side. But then on the other side, I had a very emotionally absent, neglectful, narcissistic type of father. And there was always this tension in the home, like the cycle of violence, where there's that tension building, and there would be the incident, the argument, the betrayal, whatever happened, and then promises made about how things were going to change and they were going to get better. And they might for a short amount of time, but then the tension would build again. There would be another betrayal, and then promises made and promises broken. So growing up, I was very used to that kind of up and down, hot and cold dynamic of promises made, promises broken, things get better for a short amount of time. You have hope, especially as a kid, that things are going to change and that things are going to be different, that finally maybe you can, at least for me, I was thinking maybe I can finally have a relationship like I saw other people have with their dad. But that wasn't the case. He was more interested in control than connection. Um, Criticisms, very used to feeling like I was never enough. And so that was kind of the mindset that I had growing into adulthood, entering into my first dating relationships. I also started life pretty young, like being an overachiever, which is very typical for those with narcissistic parents. I started college at 16, then graduated my master's at 22. And so I've been working as a full-time therapist ever since then. So I had this just constant gnawing feeling, as I know many survivors do, of just not being enough, like feeling like there's something wrong with you, feeling that you're fundamentally flawed or broken because who has a parent who doesn't love them or doesn't treat them well. And a lot of times we take that shame on ourselves as if there's something wrong with me, when really that's their shame as the narcissistic parent. But we don't heal that. We don't realize that until later in life. But that's the mindset that I was in entering into my adult relationship. So I had two particularly narcissistic romantic relationships. I've dealt with narcissists in different spaces, but two in particular, one with a grandiose narcissist and one with a vulnerable narcissist, and
Wow.
both with dark triad traits and all. That's a whole, we could spend a whole time going into those stories as well. But just initially, like going into that first relationship with the grandiose narcissist, that's a very specific type, which we can talk about. But they're more charming and charismatic and tend to be more extroverted and very over the top, very affectionate, very more grandiose. So after that relationship ended, I hadn't made sense of what it was. I thought, okay, I was with a jerk. Like, I know that. I know I don't want to be in another relationship like that. But I hadn't made sense of what I had experienced. I didn't know I had been with a narcissist. I didn't know what narcissistic abuse was still. I didn't know what a trauma bond was still. I just knew I want something totally different. And I definitely got that because then I got with a vulnerable narcissist. And that's the type of narcissist that seems really nice, really sweet, really unassuming, innocent, harmless. You often feel pulled to help them, support them. They kind of even seem, like I said, harmless, pitiful. Like a lot of times, how you feel around them and with them is just like, just feel sorry for them. And I just want to help them and support them. So, my guard was down as far as this person doesn't seem narcissistic. I just feel more sorry for them. And I feel like I want to help them and support them. So that grandiosity didn't look the same at all. So I ended up with a vulnerable narcissist as well, and dealt with a lot of things there. And finally, after that relationship, I had to take some time to go, okay, what is going on here? Because obviously there's a pattern. How do I end up in these relationships? Like, how do I explain these behaviors? Because for all of my therapy and all of the books I had read and communication strategies I'd known, nothing made sense. Like nothing worked. All the typical communication advice and relationship advice, tell them how you feel, give them a second chance. Maybe they're just immature. Maybe they just had a bad childhood, all these things. None of that made my relationships better, didn't make my clients' relationships better. It only made them worse. So I had to figure out what else was going on. And that's when I discovered narcissism, narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, trauma bonds. And from that framework, everything I was dealing with, the things I was trying to help my clients with at the time, started to make sense. And so ever since then, I've just been fully specializing in narcissistic abuse, relational trauma, complex trauma, and helping people make sense of these chaotic relationships.
Wow. Thank you, Chelsey, for sharing that. And from the bottom of my heart, I acknowledge what you experienced, and I also really give you so much credit for using your superpower of being open for the benefit of all of us. So this is yeah, it's so hard to hear that you went through that. And I know a lot of other people are struggling with that as well. I have so many questions here because you just shared
Yeah.
an absolute gold mine for all of us. So the standard techniques on these narcissists don't work. And
Yeah.
for example, Brian Tracy is a very successful author. He's written more than 70 books. Great guy, by the way. And he had a technique to use on essentially healing where you tell the narcissist that you forgive them. So
Mm.
I followed that technique with my father, and he proceeded to verbally abuse me. And I realized it did not work. There was no opening there for healing it well. So I'm curious how we can proceed when these typical techniques don't work.
And yeah, that breaks my heart to hear because a lot of times that's the kind of advice we initially hear with communication strategies and relationship advice of share your feelings and tell them how you feel. And that doesn't work because you're not dealing with a healthy, rational person. I think the first thing we have to, or the first thing to know is that we often positively project onto the narcissist. We assume they are like we are. They think like we do. They want the same things that we do. They're motivated by the same things that we are. Like they don't want a chaotic relationship. Of course, they want peace in their life. Like they don't want things like this. They're not trying to purposely manipulate me and exploit me. They just don't understand. We're just having a miscommunication. We have different love languages, attachment styles, all the things. And that's what keeps us spinning for so long because there's no limit to the amount of information you can Google these days. Like you can ask ChatGPT anything, you're going down these rabbit holes, and you're constantly trying to make sense of something that's never going to make sense until you recognize the type of person you're dealing with. And the reason I think a huge thing to understand about narcissists is that they are fundamentally disagreeable. And I don't just mean that in a flippant, like they're kind of difficult. I mean, as a personality construct, which I can break down, they are disagreeable. So, first of all, what does it mean to be agreeable? As most narcissistic abuse survivors are, we we don't see any reason for deception in social relationships. We believe in having open, honest, frank, sincere communication. We don't really believe in bragging. And if anything, we tend to underplay what we do because we don't want to make anybody else feel bad. If you're an agreeable person, then you really care about what somebody else is going through. You just are moved by seeing somebody upset or seeing somebody cry or even seeing something in a movie, like you feel that. So you can have sympathy and empathy for other people. You default to being collaborative. You want to be cooperative. You want harmony in relationships, and you're willing to oftentimes even sacrifice your needs or what you want for the greater good, for the good of the relationship, the good of the system, if you're in workplace, whatever. Narcissists are fundamentally the opposite of that. So all narcissists are disagreeable, meaning they don't value being humble. They actually will brag, and that is their preference. That's their default. So they're not trying to like hold back and downplay what they do. They are going to overinflate what they do. They believe that a certain amount of deception is necessary in social relationships. And that also comes because they see the world and other people as potentially harmful and devious and dangerous. Like their view of the world isn't that most people mean well, it's that most people are out to get me. That's how a narcissist views the world. They're not greatly moved by human suffering. They're not very sympathetic, empathetic. They are more likely to bully or intimidate to get their way. So
Mm.
they're not thinking, how can I communicate? Like, how can I collaborate? I don't want to be unreasonable. I want to be fair. They're not thinking any of those things. They're thinking, what do I want and how do I get it? And so I think even just knowing fundamentally that narcissists are disagreeable is a really foundational lesson so that we know you're not dealing with somebody who's looking at the world like you are.
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, fundamentally disagreeable, unable to be humble, and yeah, that naturally very combative.
Naturally antagonistic. That's a word that comes up a lot. Kind of antagonism is like even this broader word that narcissism falls under. But if you just think of the interactions that we have with narcissists, one of the most common things we hear is just how difficult it is. Everything is difficult. Everything is more challenging than it needs to be. Simple things, coordinating schedules, picking up the kids, doing life, getting milk from the store, like just normal everyday things or a normal conversation. What time are we leaving for this event? Can become an argument. And this keeps people so confused and so overwhelmed. And again, because you can't imagine somebody wants to live like that. But narcissists also are fine with chaos. They actually benefit from having chaotic relationships because it makes them feel powerful, special, entitled, to know that they can have such an influence over you, to know that they can have such control over your emotions. To have chaos going on means they also often have gossip that they can talk about, so they can triangulate people with. Did you hear so and so is doing this? And again, that makes them feel special and important to have things to gossip about. So, just in so many ways, they are living life in a very different way than you are.
Yeah, that's spot on. One question, Chelsea, that I hear asked a lot is, do we attract these narcissists to us
Mm.
because of the unhealed aspects of our own psyche and souls, or is it more just bad luck because there are so many out there?
There are a lot out there. No, you don't attract them. I think it's really important that we know up front that narcissists will exploit anyone. So it's not that you're attracting them to you. I think the more important question is, how do we get stuck? Some of us are more likely to get stuck in narcissistic relationships because narcissists are going to try to exploit anyone. So it's not like something that you're doing that has caused you to be in this relationship. It's not your fault. How somebody else acts, how somebody else treats you is never your fault. It's always on the narcissist. So I'm always going to put blame where blame should be, which is narcissists being narcissists is their problem, not yours. But just like in my own healing journey and working with so many clients, I think we can benefit from being curious about, why did I think that I didn't deserve decent treatment? Or why do I have such a hard time setting boundaries? What do I need to heal that makes me think that I deserve this kind of treatment, or that I'm not worth being with somebody who would treat me better? Like, why do I tolerate this kind of behavior? Or why am I normalizing it?
Wow.
I think those questions can be really helpful.
Wow. Yeah, this is absolute gold mine. Really, this is so valuable. I want to ask you something because I still have so many questions for you.
Yeah.
Just quickly to backtrack as we follow you here and all our listeners on YouTube, and if you're reading this on the blog as well. You mentioned your dad being very inconsistent, and then the broken promises,
Yeah.
and obviously also the abuse, which is unthinkable. Did you have a particular rock bottom moment where you truly felt devastated to your core, or was it more just the accumulation of many, many, many things over time?
It's interesting because rock bottom moments, a lot of times they're not necessarily the big things. It's just like the last thing on the shelf that makes the shelf break. In narcissistic relationships, they're a collection of betrayals. I mean, the whole relationship essentially is a betrayal because they aren't who they say they are and they're not who they pretend to be. So, certainly in all my narcissistic relationships, there's a collection of betrayals that kind of goes on this psychological shelf because like we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to make sense of it. We don't know what to think of it yet. So we're just putting all these betrayals on this psychological shelf of like, that didn't make me feel good. That wasn't okay, but I don't know what to do with it. And I don't know how to process it or how to heal from it yet. So it was certainly betrayals over time. I think one particular thing, especially with my dad, really stands out when my mom had gone to the hospital. She had some heart issues, and this was like when I was a kid. And uh, I was with my grandparents, and he had called and said how he was sorry for things and that he was going to be different and change and be more involved, and things were going to be better. And I don't know, I must have been like 8 or 9, maybe. And I knew how important that moment was because I was really close to my mom. I was homeschooled. She was like my teacher and she was on my homeschool groups and like in my sports and I was had a very full life, but like my mom was, my rock obviously, especially growing up. And so I was very emotionally distraught at that point. So for him to make a promise and that moment, it was a really emotional time and I knew that if this didn't change, if he didn't mean it this time, then I didn't know if I could go back. Like I didn't know if I could try to trust again or have hope again. And literally within a couple months, it was like back to the same cold, distant, controlling, critical behavior. So I think after that point, something in me kind of broke as far as stopped having the ability to have hope. And I just, I was angry for a lot of years, honestly, at how things were. And then I think I just shifted to I'm just going to be, this is where my perfectionistic qualities come in of I'm just going to be so perfect that you can't tell me I'm wrong. Because a lot of his criticisms were like, oh, if you would have done this, or you could have listened to me, or like setting up these scenarios where he wanted me to fail so that he could come in and save me. And so, to my kid mind, it's like, okay, well, if I just do everything perfectly, you can't criticize me, therefore you can't hurt me. And then, of course, that I've had to work on that, growing up throughout my life. But I think that was probably the moment where things changed because after that point, I was like, if you're going to lie after something so significant happened, then that's rock bottom for me. I can't hope in that anymore.
Yes, and I give you so much credit for being so self-aware to understand what it did and does to you inside, and
Yeah.
that's part of the healing journey that so many people around the world are on when having to deal with narcissists like what you had to go through. So I see that you're also very cognizant of how it
Done
has
a lot
made
of work.
feel
Yeah.
and behave, etc. What do you do with there's like a lot of people who just don't get it. They'll dish out
Uh,
advice like don't take it personally or just forgive them or let it go, or like come on, they're your parents or or it's a family or it's a lifelong friend, whatever it is. How do you deal with people like a lot just some people just flat out don't get it and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, I take a breath even as you say that because it is, and I, certainly run into those people. Honestly, I feel very fortunate to be in the space that I'm in because a lot of times people I'm talking to do get it, like other professionals or obviously clients I'm working with, they're coming because they want to get it or they are seeking understanding or they already get it and they just want to go deeper. But certainly I run into people who don't get it. So the first thing that as far as if they're in my world, like somebody that I might know, I think it's important we know who we can and can't talk to about certain things. And it's okay that you don't open up your whole life story to everybody. I know if some people don't get it, like if I talk about narcissism and they're like, well, I think, everybody's just a little bit narcissistic. Or, some people are just selfish. It's so much more than that. So I might try initially to explain it, but I'm consciously not going to take responsibility for the outcome of that, whether they get it or don't get it. I think sometimes, especially early on in our healing, we so want other people to get it because we're still trying to get it and we're trying to explain it to ourselves. And maybe we are kind of feeling bad or guilty for setting those boundaries or for seeing somebody we love as narcissistic. So we really want somebody else to get it. So it really bothers us if somebody doesn't understand because we're still trying to come to terms with it ourselves. So I will say that over time and as you heal, you tend to get more comfortable with the people who just aren't going to get it. But I'm just aware that I can talk to them about hobbies and maybe I could talk to them about other interests, but I'm not going to open up certain parts of my life to them. And I think it's for people to know like that's okay. Not everybody has to know everything about your story.
That's helpful for me because I'm an open book, so I'm getting better at it. I have to be careful who I share with
Yeah.
and who I don't. So that's also really helpful as well. Do you still have any contact with your father, and do you recommend that people cut out narcissists completely, or do you have other thoughts on that?
I don't. And it wasn't really a choice. He kind of, like I said, he was more the neglectful. There's different narcissistic types. So he was more of the neglectful narcissistic type. So he hasn't contacted me in years. But I don't necessarily recommend or not recommend. I try to encourage people to think about what's going to be most authentic for them and what is going to be healthiest for them. My goal whenever I'm working with clients and survivors isn't to just tell them what to do, but to help them build self-trust that they know what to do in each situation. There's no hard and fast right or wrong. I mean, of course, ideally, if you don't have to talk to a narcissist again and you don't have to deal with them, that's going to be ideal. But for several reasons, you may not be able to, you may not totally want to. You may enjoy like a certain aspect of that narcissistic relationship. Maybe if you can do it from like a distance or just check in with them occasionally, depending on who the narcissist is in your world. But, I guess the question that I would encourage people to reflect on is, can I be healthy and stay in contact with this person?
Hmm.
And if you can't, like if you fundamentally cannot function the way that you want to or show up in other relationships the way that you want to, if this narcissist stays in your life, then that's time to consider, disengaging or seriously limiting contact or going no contact. So it's really about what is going to be most authentic for you and then what is going to allow you to be the healthiest version of yourself.
That's excellent and very helpful. So you dealt with the narcissistic father growing up, and then you also mentioned here that you had a couple, unfortunately, of the relationships with the
Yeah.
grandiose and vulnerable narcissist, which is incredibly difficult as well. So sorry you had to deal with that. And I'm just curious, what was the turning point for you to become the psychotherapist and the best-selling author and all the amazing and wonderful things you do today? It's really incredible, and I mean that sincerely. And I'm really interested to know how you were able to transition into that after such a difficult past.
Yeah, it was definitely a process and a journey. So I have, like I said, I've specialized in narcissistic abuse for so long now. Early in my career, I'm also a registered play therapist. So I did a lot of work with kids and families as well. And so a lot of times, or a lot during the really heavy years, I was working a lot with kids and families and had a few people that I was working with relationship issues on. But I think that it really helped me to work with kids in that during that time because I was dealing with stuff so heavy personally. I don't know that I could have been in that relationship and doing what I'm doing. Like I'm very fortunate now to have a wonderful marriage who's somebody who's not narcissistic whatsoever and just very kind, and that just really helps. Um, so I had to definitely do my own healing to get to that point. Um, it's kind of just evolved over time. Like I said, I had to figure out what was going on in my relationships. Like when I finally ended that last narcissistic relationship, I knew that I would end up sacrificing my whole life for someone if I didn't stop looking at potential instead of reality. So that was a big turning point moment for me of I have to look at my patterns. I have to see like how did I get here? How can I make different choices? How can I value myself more? And through my own healing work, I, like I said, ran across learning about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. And coincidentally, that's really what I was heavily helping my clients work through as well. And so, just out of desperation for myself and to help my clients, I decided to make the shift to, and just kind of naturally happened over time. Because as I specialized in that, started promoting that, and obviously, advertising that that's what I do, just more and more people started reaching out. And so it just kind of evolved from there.
Wow, that's incredible. And speaking of therapy, I know that I'll be open myself and say that I engaged in psychotherapy for 2 years while I was living
Mhm.
overseas, and that was beyond instrumental. I mean, life-changing and being able to heal from the narcissistic abuse I endured. So I'm curious, Chelsey, what your thoughts are on the value of therapy and any other resources that you may recommend.
Yeah, and I'm in therapy as well. So I don't just, do it. I walk the talk. I I think a lot of times people go to therapy because they think that obviously they're having some kind of issue. But a lot of times clients come, as I did, from a framework of what's wrong with me. Like I've got to figure out what's happening here. And so a lot of times people come to therapy and we have this misconception that therapy is going to cure me, therapy is going to help me know what's wrong with me, or therapy is going to give me coping strategies and that's all I need. I just need to know how to cope with what I'm dealing with. And hopefully if you have a good therapist and a trauma-informed therapist, and you learn over time that therapy can do so much more than just give you coping strategies and give you advice. It can really heal the wounded parts of you, particularly in my work. If you have childhood trauma wounds or you've been betrayed in relationships, by workplaces, all those things, then you get to come and maybe talk about things that you don't talk about with anybody else. So these are really heavy things, and sometimes people feel a lot of my clients will say, I don't want to burden my friends with all of this. Like I've burned them out on talking about it, or I worry, or I feel like I've burned them out on talking about it. So therapy can be that place where you get to just come and it's a space just for you. Like it's that safe container where you get to talk about things that, you don't always necessarily want to with people that are around. Um, Trauma-informed therapy really helps because it helps put your symptoms into perspective. So it's not you, but it's what happened to you. And that's what really trauma-informed therapy means is it's looking at you as a whole person. Non-trauma informed therapy, like, back in the day was more what do you have going on? What are your symptoms? What diagnosis do you need? Okay, we'll use CBT or we'll use DBT, and that's going to fix your problems. That's not very trauma informed. Trauma informed therapy says not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And I think that framing helps a lot of people. I can't tell you how many of my clients come and they have had tremendous traumas and betrayals in their life. And I will initially ask them about childhood or things that have happened. And they're like, I think I've had a pretty good childhood. I mean, everybody has things and they have, as a way to cope, have downplayed or dismissed, or their mind has kind of learned to block out things that have happened. But when we do that, then you just see your symptoms out of context and you wonder, why am I ruminating? Why am I so anxious? Why am I depressed? Why can't I get up and do the things I want to do? Why do I keep having these kinds of relationships? So therapy can help you actually put that into perspective and go, oh, like I have been through significant things. That was really hard. And again, not to stay there or not to, roll around in it or be a victim of it, but to recognize what you've been through so that you can give yourself grace and understanding and compassion. And And lastly, the most important thing that I think therapy does is it provides you relational experiences that changes you. And what I mean by that is in therapy, you get to have somebody respond to you in the way that a healthy person should. They get to validate you. You share about things that are happening, and you get to hear someone say that was really hard. Like that's not okay. I'm sorry that you've been through that. That shouldn't have happened. And it's this is why the most powerful part of therapy is the therapeutic relationship. No matter what modality you're using, across the board, research says it doesn't matter if it's EMDR or CBT or DBT, it's the therapeutic relationship. And that's because the most powerful part of therapy is that you get to have a relationship with somebody who cares about you and shows you what it's like to be cared for. And I think that's the most powerful thing.
Very powerful. And to everyone who is listening and reading this, please know that it is more than okay to seek therapy, and seeking help is indeed a sign of strength. So please do that. It will really help you in your journey. I'm curious to ask you this question came up in my mind. Obviously, we're both active on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
and not every, and I say this in the most respectful way possible, there are a lot of great people out there. And there are different therapists and different coaches. And not every coach that I come across has the depth and background that you have. You walk the talk.
Mhm.
You're a psychotherapist, and I'm curious if you feel that coaches who don't have the depth or training or experience may not quite be as good as perhaps someone who's deeply trained in the techniques you talked about, for example, EMDR, CBT, et cetera.
Yeah. I think, it really comes, it's so hard to say because I think it comes down to the person. I think there are some coaches that honestly are more skilled in this area than therapists because
Mm.
just because you go, I mean, I did not learn of what I have learned in grad school. Maybe it's different now. I don't know. But like I had one class on diagnosis and we covered narcissistic personality disorder, like based on the DSM. And that was about it. No talk of different types of narcissists, no talk of gaslighting or trauma bonds or how to recognize that kind of relationship. Really, you know, you might hear conversations about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but not really complex trauma, not trauma that's happening in relationships, not betrayal trauma. Like all of that I learned after grad school, like on my own research and then pursuing further certifications and education and then personal experience, obviously. So I think it comes down to really the person. Like I said, even in therapy, the most important part or the most significant healing aspect of therapy is the therapeutic relationship. So whether it's a coach or a therapist, what I always encourage people to ask about and what people ask me about in the consult is like, do you have personal experience with this? How did you come to specialize in this area? Um, do you often work with people who are in narcissistic relationships? What kind of advice do you give them? Do you consider yourself to be a trauma-informed therapist? And if so, like, what does that mean to you? And most important thing is to trust your gut. Listen to your body. If you're talking to them and they're saying the right things, but something feels off, then keep moving. Um, so I think it comes down to those things and trusting yourself. And do you feel safe with that person? Do you feel like you could open up to that person? Does your body trust that person, or do you get that feeling like something just isn't right here? Or do you feel really safe with that person and just relax and calm? So I think those are important things to consider.
That makes a lot of sense. That hits on it, and I like how you also pointed out that some coaches are indeed quite excellent. It really depends on
Mhm.
that person, like you said, the vibe. What questions are you asking to understand their expertise, making sure there's a fit. So, yeah,
Right.
I'm curious how do narcissists become this way, and is there anything that we can do on a societal level to stop creating so many narcissists?
Yeah. I love this question, and I hear it all the time because everybody wants to know how are narcissists created. And I think the biggest reason most people ask this question is because we want to understand it because we think, if I understand it, then there must be a path to fix it or change it, or we can improve this relationship. Like maybe if I understood, if it's a bad childhood, then okay, maybe if they get help for their childhood trauma, then maybe the relationship will change. Or maybe if they felt insignificant growing up, then if I could, let them know that I really care about them, then this relationship would get better. So I think a lot of times A, we just can't wrap our mind around somebody being so antagonistic and difficult. But B, we think that if we understood why they are like they are, then maybe the relationship could be fixed or maybe things could change. That is not the case with narcissists. So, first of all, I like to just get this myth out of the way that trauma causes narcissism.
Mm.
It does not. That is a myth because if you think about it, then all of us here who have any childhood trauma should be narcissists. Like there should be way more. But what's more likely to happen if you've had traumatic experiences is you go on to become an anxious adult, where you struggle to set boundaries and you overgive and you sacrifice yourself and things like that. So the tricky thing about how does narcissism develop is that we can look back and go, oh, okay, well, those things probably contributed to that person becoming a narcissist. But we can't look forward. We can't look at things and predict if somebody's going to become a narcissist. So when we look back, like if we know somebody is a narcissist, they meet that criteria of validation seeking and exploitative and they're entitled and they're grandiose, then what we tend to see genetic wise is a difficult temperament, meaning we are all born with different temperaments. Some people are just very easygoing, even as kids. You can think about different kids, some of them are just very agreeable. Some of them are happier than others naturally. Some of them are just more giving naturally than others. Some have a more difficult temperament where they're just harder to soothe. They're more emotionally dysregulated. You have to redirect them more to share with others and think about how others feel. Now, again, when we look back if on narcissism, we can see that they tend to have a more difficult temperament. And then the environment tends to be one where there's an overindulgence in money, status, appearance, how things look, prestige, thinking about how you're going to be seen by the world or by other people, and then an underindulgence in things like empathy, self-reflection, awareness, meaningful relationships. Certainly, some narcissists have trauma in their past, not to discount that at all, but most people who have trauma in their past don't go on to become narcissists. So it's a complicated area of topic and it's on or discussion because and it's ongoing and it's research. But it's like any of us. If you think, well, what made you like you are today? It's going to be a big question. It's not one thing. It's often multiple things. And so the same thing with narcissists. There's lots of things we can look back on and go, oh, well, it's, likely these things interacted together. And there's also just how the narcissist responds to things and decides to make things mean. Like they might go through a situation and one person would decide, oh, I'm not good enough, and it would affect them, and they would feel really anxious and have a low self-esteem. Whereas a narcissistic person might go through something and then overinflate and get a very grandiose sense of self and to be able to deal with that situation. So there's also just your own personality choices and how you respond to things that happen in your life.
Thank you for clarifying that misconception because I also hear that a lot and
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is that trauma can cause it, but it like you said, it's not always that one-to-one correlation that so many think it is.
Yeah. And I don't know that I would even say trauma can cause it. Trauma can be a part of a narcissist's history.
Ah, okay. Hmm.
I know it's a nuanced difference,
Yeah.
but I just think it's important for people to know because if we believe that myth, then we believe addressing the trauma will address the narcissism, and it doesn't. So even if trauma is a part of a narcissist's past, they can they can absolutely hopefully process their trauma if they're willing to. Like we hear about some self-aware narcissists these days who certainly have trauma in their past and they're in therapy for it and but that doesn't change the fact that they're a narcissist. Like your personality once it's set is quite stable. So addressing that trauma might help them be more self-aware. It might help heal some of those childhood wounds, but it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to not be entitled and not be antagonistic anymore. And that's going to be their default. That's what I want people to understand is narcissists have that difficult antagonistic default. Like as easy as it is for you to be a kind, empathetic person. It's like, I don't have to think about that. I care about other people. It's natural for me to be giving or helpful. Okay. As easy as it is for you to be empathetic and helpful, that's as easy as it is for a narcissist to be exploitative and entitled.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not so simple to change. As hard as it would be for you to, I say, don't be empathetic anymore. That'd kind of be hard to, I mean, you'd be like shutting off a part of your personality to do so. Okay, well, asking a narcissist to not be antagonistic is like asking them to shut off a part of their personality.
Very
So hopefully
insight.
that,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
go
puts
ahead.
it in
Yeah.
perspective
Yeah.
of how difficult that is. And so we can't just assume that healing something from their past, if that's there, is going to change their narcissism.
That makes sense. Another big topic and subtopic related to all of this is gaslighting. And I know
Yeah.
that a lot of people struggle with this. I have struggled with this big time. And I'll say this is one that drives me especially nuts when someone denies your experience, they deny
Mhm.
reality, they rewrite the story. It's just so hard to deal with that. How do you find the confidence and the awareness and the power inside yourself to not doubt yourself even when the narcissist is trying to rewrite reality?
Absolutely. And when you're in narcissistic relationships, you're being gaslighted all the time. Just like I said, narcissistic relationships are inherently full of betrayals. It's also one big gaslight because they're constantly acting like what's happening isn't happening and want you to agree that what's happening isn't happening. So
Yeah.
you are living in a crazy making vortex. So something that I teach people to do is an acronym DLA, which stands for document, label, affirm. And it's just a really good grounding tool, especially when you are constantly being gaslighted, to remember what is true. So, what that means is obviously D is for document. And that doesn't mean you have to write down everything that happens, but even simply putting smiley faces or sad faces on the good days and the bad days, like getting out your calendar, putting a smiley face on the good day and a sad face on the bad day, meaning when there's criticism, when there's contempt, when they're being manipulative. That's a very simple and basic way to start to affirm or validate your own reality. Because sometimes we can think, I don't think it was that bad. Like, I think that happened a long time ago. And then you're able to look at your calendar and go, oh, yeah, they just lied to me like last week, or this betrayal just happened 2 days ago. Because time can move very strange in a narcissistic relationship. We can go from once things are good, we're like, oh, I think that things are better. And we haven't had issues in so long. And then you're able to look back at just a simple smiley face or sad face and go, oh, we were just having a huge argument 4 days ago. Um, you can also just quickly highlight or like write down in bullet point form the highlights of a conversation that you have. Like, here's what was said, here was the topic, here's what the narcissist said, or here's what we agreed to. Because a lot of times narcissists are going to come back and say, I never said that, I never agreed to that, never said I would do that. We never talked about that. So if you have just even the highlights of a conversation written down, going, oh yeah, we did talk about that. We did have that. Here's the text where they said that, or we did agree to that time. So documenting is your sanity. And then labeling, the L is for label, which is to label the manipulation strategy that's happening. This helps you get some distance. So instead of getting sucked into the gaslighting and then trying to explain and defend and justify, you're focusing on labeling. Ah, yes, there's the manipulation. There's the gaslight. They're trying to convince me something is true that's not true. There's the criticism. There's the triangulation. They're telling me that so and so said this about me, and they're trying to bring in some, like, say that somebody said something about me that's not true. So instead of defending, engaging, explaining, personalizing during conversations, you're just looking for the manipulation tactic that they're using. And then the A is for affirm, which is to affirm what's true and to remind yourself of why you're doing what you're doing. For example, a lot of people in narcissistic relationships will stop telling the narcissist about events until the last minute because the narcissist consistently ruins events. You have something, coming up every Tuesday at 6, they have a crisis every Tuesday at 5:50. Or they just find a way to create an argument and create chaos around events or special or important things. So you stop telling the narcissist about events until last minute. you need to be mindful and affirm to yourself why you are doing that, because the narcissist is going to say, "You're so selfish. Why didn't you tell me about that? You're so irresponsible. You don't think about anybody but yourself. How am I supposed to plan for that?" And it's very easy if you're not aware of why you're doing it to go, "Yeah, why did I do that? Like, I wouldn't like it if somebody did that to me." And then you start gaslighting yourself. So affirming means know why you're doing what you're doing. And so that when the narcissist gaslights you, which they will, you're not engaging in that, but you're affirming the truth, which is no, I'm doing this because of this, this, and this. I had to make this change because of the patterns in this relationship, not because I want to, not because I'm selfish. Like, I'm capable of communicating. I'm not doing it because of something wrong with me. I'm doing it because of the pattern that has existed in this relationship.
DLA, that is extremely helpful. So I love that, and I'm sure that will help a lot of people. We talked through our conversation today about many. You've mentioned many of the characteristics of narcissistic of
Yeah.
people, and you talked about being naturally antagonistic, and you shared many other things as well. I also hear a lot about the lack of empathy. I'm just curious, any other major characteristics that come up that you'd like to add in?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we could talk, yeah, we could
Yeah.
talk about that for a long time. Um, but definitely, I think it's imp I think people should know that there are different types of narcissists, and we've touched on a few of those because we often have this idea that a narcissist is just over the top and extroverted and gregarious and social and charming, and the grandiose narcissist is, and they're kind of a little bit easier to spot. I think because they are also just talked about so much these days that anytime somebody is over the top and arrogant, we're like, they could possibly be narcissistic. So the grandiose narcissist is that stereotypical, charming, charismatic, arrogant person. Vulnerable narcissist is the one that appears very nice or sullen, depressed, and withdrawn. A lot of therapists even will initially treat vulnerable narcissists for depression because that's what it looks like. I'm a big proponent of paying attention to your body and your feelings, like how you feel around somebody. So if you consistently feel pulled to fix, please, give of your resources, time, attention to somebody, and you feel always, or you leave those situations often feeling sorry for them, feeling like you pity them, that is a sign that you might be dealing with a vulnerable narcissist, of course, assuming that they have the other characteristics of narcissism as well. But that's often how we feel around vulnerable narcissists because they just seem so sad. And that is how they manipulate you, is to gain your sympathy, your pity, your attention, your support. That can be off-putting because we think, oh, they can't be narcissistic. They seem so like self-deprecating. No narcissist talks to themselves like that. Actually, a vulnerable narcissist does because they want, again, like I said, your sympathy, your pity, attention. A few of the other ones I mentioned were the neglectful narcissist. These are the ones that they have all the typical narcissistic traits. They're entitled, they're grandiose, they see relationships in a very transactional way. But they don't tend to have there's not a lot of arguments. There's not a lot of like interaction with them. They will just literally treat you like a ghost. They use the silent treatment a lot. So they in particular see relationships in a very transactional way. You literally exist to them when they want something and you don't exist to them when they don't. There's the self-righteous narcissist. It's like a mix of OCD and narcissism, or OCD personality disorder and narcissism, meaning that they are just very rigid, very structured, almost like obsessively so, and fixated on perfecting a certain area of their life. So whether it's how well they do their taxes or keep up with their money, or how clean their house is, whatever it is, they get their supply by being seen as just incredibly put together and responsible and organized and dependable. Um, and then malignant narcissist is right before you get to psychopathy. They are a mix of narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and sadism. They are like the highest narcissists that you can get. They're sadistic and vengeful and exploitative, and you often feel scared of them because you don't know how far they're going to go. So I think it's helpful for people to know that narcissism can come in different sizes, and I do talk about 6 types in my book. So if you want to do a deeper dive, you can look at that because it's important to know that they don't all look the same.
Incredibly helpful. I know we talked a lot about narcissism in relationships and also society at large. I know in the work I do and the people I talk to, there's a mind-blowing amount of narcissism in the workplace, sadly. And
Yeah.
these narcissistic leaders who are running corporations or in management positions, or even a regular colleague, can be insanely simply unthinkably destructive. And I'm curious, what would your advice be to anyone, whether in a workplace, a relationship, an organization, whatever it may be? They're stuck in a situation where they're dealing with a narcissist, they're scared, they don't know what to do. What advice do you have for
Mhm.
them?
Hmm. I think in these situations, education and awareness is the most important first step. If you, like I said, you really have to know who you're in the room with. And so, first, educating yourself on narcissism and narcissistic abuse and these typical patterns just to give you a grounding for what you're dealing with. The reason that most of my therapy process, like having worked with just thousands of therapy hours at this point with narcissistic abuse survivors, we tend to follow this process of we first have to just make sense of what you're even dealing with because until you are able to recognize these narcissistic patterns, like the narcissistic cycle of abuse, and recognize that they don't view the world in the same way that you do, until you get to see them for who they really are, you're going to keep trying to make sense of their behavior based on who you are. And that's going to keep you stuck. That's going to keep you in this crazy making cycle because none of the typical communication relationship advice is going to make sense. It's not going to make things better. Actually, it's going to make things worse. So I would first honestly use some of that DLA, like document label affirm, to get to start to get grounded because these relationships leave you feeling so confused, so chaotic, so internally discombobulated. You need something to ground you. And so recognizing first what you're dealing with is key to lifting the self-blame. It's key to start making sense of things. And then once you start gaining awareness, then you can either find a group or like ideally if you can work with somebody to kind of help you process through what you're experiencing um, and then go from there.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I'm among all the great things you're saying, I'm hearing they're really not alone, that this just happens in so many
Yeah,
places. And like you, as they go through and using DLA like awareness and recognition and reclaiming their power, they're not alone. It's just happening in so many places around the world.
it really is. Yeah, we have speaking of statistics on how many, a huge NIH study said narcissistic personality disorder is at a lifetime prevalence rate of about 6%. And based on the current US population, that would be about 20 million narcissists that would meet criteria for NPD, which you don't have to be diagnosed to be a narcissist. But if you assume that those 20 million narcissists negatively affect five other people throughout their lifetime, which is a really conservative estimate, that's 99 million narcissistic abuse survivors in the US alone. So when we say that this is literally happening
Wow.
at epidemic proportions, that it's affecting millions and millions of people all over the world, that's not inflated. That is literally based on the statistics.
Wow. Wow, that's jaw hitting the floor. What is your take on forgiveness? I have really wanted to ask you that one. What's your take on that? Do you believe that that's feasible or is it not?
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that as you share that. That's an interesting perspective that you need to forgive the narcissist. I think it's more about acceptance and indifference rather than I think you might get to a point where you forgive them, but I think if you start out trying to forgive, then you're going to force yourself
Mhm.
through things that you really need to process. Like we really need to sit with the fact that it wasn't okay before we even think about moving towards something like forgiveness. And then I think forgiveness looks different for different people. I think a huge part of that forgiveness conversation that gets overlooked is we have to forgive ourselves because we often hold ourselves to greater standards than we do other people. And so a lot of people have a lot of self blame for not seeing the signs. Why did I let this happen? I should have known better. Uh, so I think a lot of that forgiveness has to come internal before you ever think about what that would look like for somebody else. And so we have to forgive ourselves for just not knowing what we didn't know in order to let go of that self-blame and heal.
Let me ask you something, and I ask in full sincerity. So it's a long-term project. I'm working on a new book. It's called Mom and Dad, I Forgive You, and the subtitle is Healing from Chronic Abuse, Complex Trauma, and Being Crucified as the Family Scapegoat. And I wanted to ask if you're okay with me sharing your story as one of the case studies in the book, among other case studies I'll be sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be fine with that. Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful book. I need to get it when it comes out.
Perspective you shared is going to be a very powerful insight in the book. And regarding what you went through with your father, do you feel like you've been able to let go and forgive, or is your power more in a sort of neutral space where you can you just recognize who he is, and then that allows you to move on?
I think it's acceptance and indifference. I I think that ultimately I'm a believer that at some point we all have to take responsibility and we'll be held accountable for what we do in life. So I don't even feel like it's my job to hold accountable or not, or to forgive or not forgive. It's more, I think everybody's going to ultimately be held accountable. So I just focus more on acceptance of who he is and how people choose to be like that. And more honestly, I feel bad for people who are like that. So I would say that I forgive him, but I would say I honestly feel sorry for him for creating that kind of life.
Thank you so much, Chelsey, for just everything you've shared in this conversation. It has helped me. It will help a lot of people. We could talk about this for
I
hours and
know.
hours. What we shared
Okay.
is definitely enough for to get this conversation going. And I encourage anyone who is coming across this content. Check out Chelsey's book. If only I'd known how to outsmart narcissists, set guilt-free boundaries, and create unshakable self-worth. Chelsey, really appreciate your time today. You've been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.